Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today it's our pleasure to present the dazzling 1995 film Fallen Angels, directed by Wong Kar-wai. This is one of the films that set, you might say, the standard for visual creativity in the 90s in global cinema. There's a special collaboration here between Wong Kar-wai and his cinematographer, Christopher Doyle. We'll be talking about that, the story, and a number of other features of the distinct aesthetic of Wong Kar-wai after today's screening. It'll be our pleasure to do so with critic Peter Hitchcock, a fellow faculty member here at the City University of New York. Now, take this opportunity to enter the very special Hong Kong of Wong Kar-wai in Fallen Angels. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to see the extraordinary, dazzling visual pyrotechnics of Wong Kar-wai and much more to the film than just that. To talk about the visual and the more, we have once again a good friend from CUNY joining us here, my colleague, Professor Peter Hitchcock. Peter is a professor of English, Film Studies, and Women's Studies. He holds appointments at both Baruch College and at the CUNY Graduate Center. For the last 15 years or so, he's been writing and thinking about both Chinese cinema and post-colonial theory, two subjects that happen to meet when one talks about Hong Kong cinema, the cinema of a post-colonial society. Peter, let's just start out with the visual, because it's, in a certain sense, it's the most obvious point. This is a collaboration. Let's underline what the collaboration is and what its importance is.
Yeah, when Wong Kar-wai and Christopher Doyle get together, you're always going to get something akin to cinematic kinesis, right? And this film is full of that. It's velocity plus light. And some of the light is quite bright, some of the close-ups are quite intense, but it means that it's a highly stylized film. And in fact, if you're somebody who goes into the movie theater looking for plot, you're going to come out of this film wanting, because it's really not interested in plot or narrative along those lines. It is interested in what Doyle and Wong Kar-wai think of as how to study sort of human relationships using camera, light, distance, and what I was saying, kinesis.
Right.
And so Hong Kong is a great place for that, and they've shown that before in Chungking Express. It's a city they know very well. I guess the cliche would be a city that never sleeps. But this time they shoot the entire film during the night.
Right, absolutely.
And that just adds to the emphasis placed upon on light, not on dialogue, because there's almost no dialogue in the film. I mean, just a few lines.
Right.
We do, of course, have voiceover, but even the voiceover is somewhat ironic, right? You have, for instance, the mute with a voiceover, which is a first for me in movie history. But that
highly visual radio, right?
Highly visual radio,
Right.
and you get this sense always that that Doyle's camera work, his cinematography, is both in love with these characters, but basically the only thing that makes them stand up as characters, because we can't rely on their extant speech or their direct interaction, because most of the pairings, and there are 3 pairs in the film, they hardly ever directly interact. So it's a wonderful collaboration on
Well, I think you bring up a really interesting point by introducing already into the visual mix this question of these interior monologues, these voiceovers, because that then raises the question of, in the broadest sense, of who's narrating this film.
Yeah.
And in an obvious sense, we have multiple narrators, because we have people who come on the soundtrack narrating. But I think one of the points that you're making, and if you're not, I'll make it, is that this sort of composite creative presence, which is Wong Kar-wai and Christopher Doyle working together, means that the visuals become, they're so striking. There's no way you can be distant from the visual stylization of the film. I mean, it's as the phrase goes, it's in your face. So it becomes this narrating system of the film. We're reading the characters so strongly through these manifestly non-realist. I mean, we're set in a place. There's unquestionably we're in the real Hong Kong. Yet the distortions and the camera placements are so strong that we're saying, okay, I must be interpreting this character according to the visual protocols I've been given.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point there, Jerry, which is that, we know that it's a real place, Hong Kong, but Hong Kong is also known for a certain level of unreality, right? That it's a center of the bizarre and a center, at least at this moment, at the moment of the film, of colonial hypercapitalism, right?
Right, absolutely.
But 2 years from the official handover, when you would move from colonial hypercapitalism to something that looks actually eerily familiar, still hypercapital, and actually part of the handover was dedicated to preserving these relations for 50 years,
right?
Sort of keeping Hong Kong as it is or was. And I think for Wong Kar-wai, there's this, you never can tell in this film from its visual stylistics whether he and Doyle are interested in sort of preserving the what was of colonial Hong Kong, which may indeed have been prime force behind the kind of visual style of this kind of movie and certainly of Chungking Express and Days of Being Wild. I mean, this is kind of Nights of Being Wild, if you like.
That's right. Very nice. Yeah, but it's true.
Or whether it's actually the fear of the handover that is over-determining this aesthetic of speed and velocity within the film. I mean, maybe it's part and parcel of the same thing, but you always wonder about that in the hollowness of the relationships, in the meetings that don't take place, that might take place, whether this is actually, more or less a commentary on 97 and what may or may not happen as a result of 97.
Well, just following your line about the hyper capitalism, etc. I mean, one of the things that Hong Kong is most famous for is a paradise of consumerism. Every good in the world, everything you would ever want is available 24 times 7. But of course, one way to think about that is to embrace it. Wow, shop till you drop, shop till you die. But another way, obviously, to interpret the same phenomenon is, where are the values beyond the values of acquisition? Where are the values beyond the values attributed to fetishized consumer objects? It's all a world of shallow relations in a certain kind of way. And there's a way in which this film, because it doesn't embrace really characters of great psychological depth, even though they have their voiceovers. There's a way in which it's almost as if they're the flotsam and the jetsam of this consumer society. They're the characters that are left over all night long. Once the main shopping period, as it were, is over, and the striking use which of for example, of McDonald's.
Yes, yeah. I think McDonald's will be very proud of this product placement, and of course that's where that meeting takes place between Leon Lai and Karen Mock. I mean, we should call her Karen Mock Donald's, perhaps. And it's very odd because it's a 24-hour, it's open 24 hours, as you say, and yet they're the only people in it. But that's the only way they could get that great line about, can I sit here? And he looks around. You've got plenty of other seats available. Yeah, and that's an interesting point about Hong Kong too, how this mode of commodification has kind of hollowed out relationships. Perhaps it is product placement, you know, because you get Lay's crisps in there and Heineken and Doritos, etc. But yeah, what remains, and I think one of the things that the camera does is ask what constitutes a relationship, given the normative activities of everyday life in Hong Kong. And so things happen by chance, you know, there are always chance meetings. And you get these scenes where characters try to find out a little bit more about other characters, but in unusual ways. Like, for instance, the killer's sidekick goes through his trash, right? And you know, what an exciting way to find out about somebody through their refuse. I mean, you say that they're the flotsam and jetsam, but it's taken to another degree, which is to look through that flotsam and jetsam's flotsam and jetsam, and then come up with some kind of analysis of where he goes, the bar that he goes to, which is, of course, how she, you know, she starts going to the same bar, sits in his own, the seat that he uses when he's there. What do you do for relaxation? What do you do actually for love?
Very good questions.
Love only comes up briefly, and there's a certain intensity, but there's a lot of unrequited love in this film.
Absolutely, absolutely the case. And there's a way in which, you know, there's a longing on the characters to fit in, but there's also a rejection of fitting in. The most, I think, one of the key examples of that is after the first assassination scene when he jumps on the bus and the aggressive insurance agent engages with him. But the insurance agent is someone who has embraced fully all the values of hypercapitalism of Hong Kong. I wouldn't be on this bus if my Mercedes-Benz hadn't broken down. By the way,
and tries to sell him a policy, even though he's an old friend, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doesn't waste a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. And did I mention that I'm the best insurance broker in Southeast Asia? And so you say, well, wait a minute. I mean, so now we're in a place in which I sort of see why you might want to be in the night world, if this really is the day world in some sense. And yet, at the same time, there's the really quite moving moment in which the young woman says, "I wanted to be blonde so people would remember me."
Yes, yeah. And later on, at the end of that relationship, she bites him, right? And she says,
"Absolutely,
right. I only bit you because you'll have something to remember me by, right? Beyond the catastrophe of this particular relationship." Yeah, that's a lovely comic scene, that on the bus.
Right.
If only because it also reveals that for him, the killer, the family is also kind of arbitrary, right? He's got that photograph of the black woman and
which is obviously a provocation to everyone, because everyone's going to ask him for the photo, and he said, "Okay, you want the photo?
Yeah, here's
the photo," and so maybe we won't get the dinner invitation.
Yeah, yeah. But that also emphasizes sort of a sub-theme in the film about visual attachment, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That photo can be used to somehow define him, but it's a fib. You know, it is a bit of a fib. Same with the child. Right. Who he bought an ice cream or something like that. And then you see that again with the mute's videos, these obsessive videos, which is very funny, but you keep thinking at the back of your mind, well, this is sort of also Wong Kar-wai's obsession too, right? The mute, he doesn't speak in the film with language, but in his film language, he's intensely interested in producing memoration, as it were.
Well, let's stay with the mute for a moment, because if you watch the first 10 minutes of this film, your expectation is going to be, wow, this is a interesting, slightly different, but Hong Kong gangster picture.
Absolutely, absolutely. John Woo all the way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's as if, like, the first shootout, it's like, okay, so I've seen The Killer, and I've seen Hard Boiled by John Woo, so I'm going to work out a whole visual stylization of this as well. I mean, it's almost like, competing painters. It's, it's Matisse and Picasso. What can I do with color that you didn't do with color, etc. But then arrives the mute.
And we get the Marx Brothers, Harpo, and
absolutely. So, how do you think that functions in the film, and also in a sort of broader sense in Wong Kar-wai's aesthetics? I mean, what he's sort of up to as an artist.
Yeah, I think actually one of the conceits, obviously, of the mute is that it saves him from having to mask dialogue, right?
Right.
So he can focus on action. But it's also it also places a special emphasis on human interaction, like, because you have to try even harder if you can't use words to bring somebody to your attention. So he has little posters, right? We get these really comic scenes of he gives people haircuts who don't want them, or washes their hair when they don't want them. With the ice cream truck, it's a wonderful sequence there, where he basically invites this guy to consume the entire truck's ice cream. Has the family there. It's actually quite touching, because it says that beneath all the banality of this hyper capitalism and consumption, there is still enough human intensity to think of another way of living, another way of interacting. But still, every time you think that he's going to explore that further, and the mute then speaketh the most, as it were, within the film, he overlays another layer, which is to say that really this character without speech is like the other two male characters without speech. And Akbar Abbas, whose work on the disappearance of Hong Kong is quite profound, talks about a sort of character metonymy, where they really are replaceable characters. You could switch them between relationships and still make the same point in terms of the desire to connect, but not being able to quite connect.
Well, and that is also this notion of the disposable object within a consumer society.
Right.
So if an object is not designed to be a piece of furniture passed on for 17 generations in a family, an object that you buy has, and this is to now bring up one of Wong Kar-wai's favorite concepts in time, an expiration date.
Right.
Everything has an expiration date, and one of the features of the world he portrays is that the expiration dates are very limited. These are not long-term expiration dates. Everything has its period, and then it's disposable, and that seemingly not only includes relationships, but it includes characters themselves.
Yeah, I think we get the explanation actually for the mute's muteness, because he's consumed pineapple, right, a can of pineapple beyond its expiration date, which of course is that link with Chungking Express, when cans of pineapple are obviously very much, very, very important. But Hong Kong itself has an expiration date, right, which is the interesting thing with the changeover, the handover. According to the agreement, things must remain pretty much the same for 50 years. But during that 50 years, the mainland, the PRC, is hoping that China will become enough like Hong Kong that when the handover is complete, basically be the same.
Right, nobody will notice the difference.
No, nobody will notice the difference anymore. Yeah, right. But in terms of relationships, does that change the form of those relationships? Does that make people think about what constitutes Hong Kong society in another way? We spoke earlier before the program about how Hong Kong is also a center for migration, intense immigration, emigration. Things kind of pass through Hong Kong without fixing themselves, and you see that in the way people dwell in the film. Right, you have apartments that aren't really lived in. They're just points of transience, and they're just, I guess, like it's the whole ships in the night aspect of this film.
And the mute's father, I mean, is the clerk at this hotel, which is set in the same neighborhood as Chungking Express, which is a working class transient neighborhood in which cheap accommodations for the people passing in whatever direction, in and out, are there, emphasizing that very feature. And of course, you've also brought up the fact that there's this longing for family in the film, and the mute is the one who has the family relationship we see. Yet ironically, it seems to be impeding his growth. But everybody else has. It's like to draw this into the circle of film noir. One of the distinct features of the film noir films that are sometimes not talked about that much is there's so many characters in film noir that aren't connected with families in cities.
Right.
Or the family has been destroyed, as opposed to, for example, a genre like the Western or the standard melodrama in which the family is the center unit. And here, this is a city of young people who... Does their family live in the PRC in Taiwan? Did they break up with their family?
Right.
What is this? We meet them when they're autonomous and striving for themselves in the city.
Yeah, and there's a certain sadness to that.
Absolutely.
To that. There's a desire for sex, but does sex happen? I mean, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I think the only scene of sex that we actually see is the masturbation.
Right, absolutely.
The killer's sidekick again, which is wonderful because she's doing that while she's smoking. I can only think of that as premature inhalation.
You've been waiting for quite a while.
It's a weird moment. It's a weird moment because clearly she's falling in love with this person who she doesn't really know apart from his trash. But this is not a film where you ever think there's going to be a happy ending. In fact, when you get to the end of the film, you start asking yourself immediately, well, what's it about? And you reflect upon it from that position of sort of confusion.
Right. But the interesting point that a number of critics have brought up is that even in a film like this one, which has such a highly fragmented narrative, I mean, it becomes so episodic.
Right.
In that, actually, as it were, on the second viewing, and certainly on the third, and the third and the fourth, what one finds out is that it's actually a highly unified film, but it's not unified by traditional patterns of plotting. It's by visual style, by a set of motifs, because it's a film that begins with the shot about will we be partners or not?
Yes. Yeah.
And that it ends with the beginning of a new possible partnership.
Yeah.
And in a certain way, to look at these episodes is, and I think you were moving towards this, is a kind of theme and variation, that they're all about the same thing, and so we keep dipping into, as it were, the same thematic materials about what it means to be Hong Kong urban, young, because so much of it is about romantic longing in one way or another, and we keep meeting the same characters, even though they have different, they seem different when you first meet them, and then you find out that they're deeply involved with the same concerns.
Yeah, and that we've talked about that kind of character substitution.
Right.
But there's always this, what is the level of emotional intensity between these characters? And in a subsequent film, in Happy Together, that's explored in a bit more detail because you've got something closer to a plot to hang on to. Right. But nevertheless, at least in terms of asking the question of what constitutes a relationship in Wong Kar-wai's oeuvre, in Fallen Angels, it remains an open issue, and so there's a certain seriality about this. So we not only think of the literal characters who connect between, say, Chungking Express and Fallen Angels, but also of the types of relationship that are represented. You could almost jumble 2 or 3 films in this respect and juxtapose their scenes.
Well, I think it's interesting. You bring up this interesting point. By this point, his reputation is large enough globally that the films, while they all stand as a unit unto themselves, they're readable as that. They become also cross-referential in the way of Faulkner novels, of this character, there's this motif that refers to an earlier work, and then that that has moved on all the way to the film 2046.
Right. I think in that respect, Wong Kar-wai deals with what would literally be called a big picture, right? That he knows that he's not going to tell a story necessarily in one film, but in terms of the themes that you mentioned earlier, this is clearly a director who thinks in the long term about how to come up with new ways visually to understand the human.
That's a great place for us to stop, and that's lucky because we have to stop.
Okay.
If you'd like more information about this series or about CUNY TV, please take a look at our website, www.cuny.tv. You'll find click-ons describing all of our programming, as well as ways of communicating with us by, no surprise, email. Once again, please visit www.cuny.tv. Peter, always a pleasure to have a lively discussion with you. Yes. You bring so much to this. We look forward to doing it again when we go to Hong Kong or into another one of your interests.
Nice to be here again.
Good. Terrific. And thank you for joining us on City Cinematheque. Hope you join us again. But in any case, it's a pleasure to have you here today as we stroll through the archives of film history. Bye-bye for now.